Hey guys, welcome back. So for this tutorial I wanted to start off doing something a little different and give you guys an opportunity to practice some of the stuff we learned so far. In order to get to the point where you can create things in Unreal without tutorials, because yes, there will come a day when you want to make something and you can't find a tutorial for it, you need to work on taking your ideas and figuring out how to turn them into logic and variables a computer can understand. So today I want you guys to do two things. First, improve our health bar widget by showing the number value of our health on the screen. And second, go into the enemy blueprint and change the damage done to any number above 50, and explain why it no longer quits the game when the health bar is empty. Okay, so pause this video, take a few minutes and work through these problems on your own, then come back and I'll show you guys what I did. Okay guys, welcome back. Hopefully you had some success in figuring out at least one of those problems, but if not, no worries. That's what the second part of this video is for. So for the first thing, about the widget and displaying the player health, let's go into our widget. We'll open this up, and what we want to do is look over here for this thing under common called text. And we're going to drag this right in here underneath our progress bar. And what I'm going to do with this, just make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to change this from saying the default text block to 00. And I will change the font to something bigger that we can see, like 48. And I'll scroll down here and make sure that this text is centered. Okay, so now if I compile and save, and I hit play, we will see that we have our little text number that shows up here. Now if you'll notice, this is kind of off-center, and if I put this in full screen, it looks like it's gone back to the center. But as I change screen size, you see it's moving around. So if you guys had this problem, you forgot to anchor your little text widget here. And remember, I told you guys about the anchors, and you see how this one is over here in the top left. What we want to do is scroll up here, go to anchor, and make sure it's top center. And that will fix that problem for you. Now the other thing we need to do is somehow link this to the player health, just like we did with the progress bar percent over here. But for this one, we're not going to create a binding. What we're going to do is we're going to make a function for this. Because to be honest guys, creating a binding is probably not the best thing to do for your health. Because a binding is basically like having that nagging little sibling or nagging little kid in the back seat of a car on a long road trip, and it's just like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? You don't really need to ask that on a trip that's going to take 4 hours. You know, every minute you don't need to ask because you know you're not gonna be close. And that's basically what a binding does. It constantly asks, what's the player health? What's the player health? What's the player health? So what we want to do to be more efficient is create a function. So I'm going to come in here to the event graph, and we'll get out of this player health function. And what we're going to do is we're going to create another function here. And we're going to call this health value. And now that we already have our player reference from before, we can drag that out, say get player reference. And what we want to do again is get health. And we want to set this value to, if we go back to our designer, this little text box. Now we can rename this text health value, and we want to make sure we check this little box here that says is variable. That way we can access it in the graph. So if you guys notice over here in the graph, the only variables we have are this player reference that we created with a cast and the progress bar. But once we check this little box here, you'll notice now that this health value text comes up here. And this is exactly what we want. So we're going to drag this guy out and say get. And then what we want to do, this is just the container. This is just the text widget container, and what's inside of that is actually a number. So we want to say set text. And this is actually going to set that number that we have in there currently at 0, 0. And we're going to set it to our player health. So this is automatically going to convert our float value into a text value. So we can compile and save that. And now what we're going to do, if you look, if we hit play, it still says 0, 0. And the reason for that is we haven't called that function. Remember, functions, unlike bindings, you have to explicitly call. So we'll go into our event graph, and right after we cast to our third-person character, we can say call health value. And this will set our health value to the player's starting health, which will be 100. So now if we hit play, you'll see it says 100. But again, if I run into our box here, it's not updating. And the reason for that is we haven't told it to update once the player health changes. So we're going to need to go into our third-person character, and we will probably put this right here in isPlayerAlive, right? Because we're running this function every time the player health changes, so it would make sense to put it in here. So what we're going to do is right off of the false here, if the player health isn't equal to 0, we're going to use our widget reference that we created when we made this widget. And this is the reason why I told you guys to save those widgets as references so that you can use them here. If you guys remember, right over here we created the widget and we added it to the viewport, but I had you guys do this and save that as a variable. And this is why, because now we have easy access to everything that's within that widget. So what we're going to do, just like we grab health out of the player character, we can grab the text out of this widget. So we can say get health value, and that is the text box that's holding our number. And what we want to do is set text. So now we're going to set this value, and we'll have this come off of the false, and the value we want to set it to is player health. And we'll just move that here, move this out of the way, and just so that it looks nice, even right before we quit, actually no, I'll just leave it there. It won't ever go down to 0, it'll just quit the game. If you want it to actually say 0, you can just Control-C, Control-V, and have it do this right before you quit. And have it set to the same thing. Okay? Don't forget to hook up your targets. So now, if we play the game, you see we're starting at 100, but as we get hurt, you see it's now changing the value, and we quit when we get down to 0. Now the other thing I asked you guys to do was to go into our enemy and change this to anything over 50. So we'll say 51. Now if we play, see it goes down to 49, that's great. But now we're at -2 and we somehow have not quit the game and we can keep getting hurt, which that is not what you want for your health. So what did we do wrong here? Well, computers are very, very specific, and if you look in our third-person character where we have this isPlayerAlive function that's supposed to be checking to make sure the player has not hit 0, if you see what it says, health equals 0. So if it doesn't land exactly at 0, so if an enemy takes away too much damage, which is why I said anything over 50, because now 100 minus 51 is 49, and 49 minus 51 gives you the -2. -2 does not equal 0, so this will actually come here to false, it sets the health value to -2, and you never quit the game. So what we want to do is we want to replace this. We'll delete it, and we'll say equal. But now you see we'll look for this less than or equal to, and that's the one that will cover if the player has negative health and doesn't land exactly at 0. So now it'll check and make sure the health is not 0 or anything less than 0, which is exactly what we want. So now if we minimize and hit play, you'll see that we now quit the game. And that's exactly how we want it to do. So hopefully you guys were able to get a couple of those things on your own. If not, just remember it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's a thought process. It's how you take your ideas and put them into these variables and how you create the logic that you're going to need to eventually make great games. So I hope you guys thought that was helpful, and if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more tutorials. Alright guys, see you later.